My fiancée left me at the altar. She regretted it, the moment she saw my guest. My hands were shaking as I adjusted my bow tie for the 10th time, staring into the mirror of the small antechamber at St. Mary's Church. Through the door, I could hear the murmur of guests settling into their seats, the soft organ music floating through the air. After 40 years of life and countless disappointments, I was finally about to marry the woman I loved. Emma and I had met 3 years ago at a charity fundraiser. She was vibrant, intelligent, and kind. Everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. When she said yes to my proposal 6 months ago, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Now, standing in my tailored suit, waiting to begin the ceremony, I couldn't believe that happiness was finally within my grasp. "Time to go, son," Pastor Wilson said, poking his head into the room. "Your bride has arrived." I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. This was it. This was the beginning of our life together. I walked down the aisle, taking my place at the altar. The music changed. The guests rose to their feet and the doors opened. Emma appeared in the doorway, breathtaking in her white gown, her father beside her. Our eyes met across the church, and for a moment everything felt perfect. But as she began walking down the aisle, something changed. I saw her slow her pace. Her smile faltered. Her father leaned in, whispering something. She shook her head slightly, her face suddenly pale. When they reached the altar, her father stepped back. Emma stood before me, her eyes wide and filled with something I'd never seen before. Fear. "What's wrong?" I whispered, reaching for her hand. She pulled back as if my touch would burn her. "I'm sorry, Jackson," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't do this." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Emma, what?" "I can't marry you," she said, louder now, her voice echoing in the sudden silence of the church. "I'm sorry." And then she turned and ran, her white dress billowing behind her as she fled down the aisle, leaving me standing alone, stunned and humiliated in front of everyone we knew. The church erupted in shocked whispers. I stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Pastor Wilson placed a hand on my shoulder, saying something I couldn't hear over the roaring in my ears. My best man, David, stepped forward, his face a mask of concern. "Jackson, let's go," he said softly. "Come on, man." But I couldn't move. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything we'd been through, all our plans, our dreams. I finally turned to face the guests, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Faces blurred together, pitying expressions, shocked stares, phones discreetly recording my devastation. And then, in the back row, I saw her. My mother. Vivian Carlyle hadn't spoken to me in 15 years, not since the explosive argument that had torn our family apart. Yet here she was, watching my most vulnerable moment with an unreadable expression. Later, in the privacy of my apartment, David told me what he'd learned. Emma had received a phone call just before the ceremony began. She'd stepped outside to take it, returning visibly shaken. "Who called her?" I asked, my voice hollow. "I don't know," David said. "But she was fine before that call, Jackson. Something happened." The next morning, I went to Emma's apartment, desperate for answers. Her roommate, Miranda, answered, her expression guarded. "She's not here," Miranda said, "and honestly, I don't think she wants to see you." "I need to know why," I pleaded. "What happened? What changed?" Miranda hesitated, then sighed. "Someone called her right before the ceremony, told her things about you, Jackson, things you apparently never shared." My blood ran cold. "What things?" "Your arrest," she said flatly. "The drunk driving incident when you were 23. The woman who was injured." She crossed her arms. "Emma said you told her you'd never had trouble with the law. My world collapsed around me. That mistake, the worst night of my life 17 years ago. I'd completed my community service, paid my debt to society. The woman had recovered fully. It wasn't something I was proud of, but it was in my past." "Who told her?" I asked, though somehow I already knew the answer. "Your mother," Miranda said. "She said Emma deserved to know who she was really marrying." My mother, who hadn't spoken to me in 15 years, who hadn't bothered to attend any family event since our falling out, who suddenly appeared at my wedding only to destroy it. That night, As I sat alone in my empty apartment surrounded by gift boxes that would need to be returned, I received a text message from an unknown number. I only did what was necessary. You can thank me later. Mom. I stared at those words until my vision blurred with tears of rage. She hadn't just humiliated me, she'd robbed me of my future, my happiness, all while believing she was doing the right thing. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. 3 days after what should have been the happiest day of my life, I found myself standing outside my mother's house in Westfield, a wealthy suburb where I grew up. The colonial-style home with its manicured lawn and perfect rose bushes looked exactly the same as it had 15 years ago. Pristine, controlled, and cold. I hadn't been here since the night I'd stormed out after my father's funeral, when my mother had accused me of caring more about my career than my own family. The argument had been brutal, with decades of unspoken resentments finally erupting to the surface. We'd both said unforgivable things, and afterward I'd cut all ties, or so I thought. I rang the doorbell, my entire body tense with barely contained fury. After a moment, the door swung open, and there she was, Vivian Carlyle, 68 years old but looking a decade younger, her silver hair perfectly styled, dressed in an elegant cashmere sweater and tailored pants. "Jackson," she said, as if I'd just stopped by for a casual visit, "I wondered when you'd come." "You sabotaged my wedding," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. She sighed, stepping back to let me in. I protected Emma from making a terrible mistake. There's a difference. I walked into the familiar foyer, memories crashing over me like waves. The house smelled the same, lemon polish and fresh flowers. Family photos lined the walls, but I noticed that most pictures of me had been removed. My life had been literally erased from this space. "You had no right," I said, following her into the living room. "No right to tell Emma about something that happened 17 years ago. Something I've paid for. Something that has nothing to do with who I am now." My mother sat down primly on her antique sofa, gesturing for me to take a seat. I remained standing. "She deserved to know what kind of man she was marrying," Vivian said, her tone maddeningly reasonable. "You were driving drunk, Jackson. You could have killed someone." "I was 23, I countered. "I made a terrible mistake. I accepted responsibility. I changed my life after that night." "Did you?" she asked, arching one perfect eyebrow. "Because the Jackson I know has always run from his mistakes rather than facing them." Her words hit me like a physical blow. "You don't know me," I said. "You haven't known me for 15 years. "I know you better than you think," she replied. "I know you've been lying to Emma about your past. What else have you been hiding from her?" I clenched my fists, trying to maintain control. I didn't lie, I just didn't think my fiancé needed to hear about the worst night of my life from my estranged mother 15 minutes before our wedding. "If you had nothing to hide, my call wouldn't have mattered," Vivian said. "Emma made her choice based on the truth, something you never gave her." I paced the room, struggling to understand the woman sitting calmly before me. "Why now? Why show up after 15 years just to destroy my happiness?" She looked genuinely surprised by the question. "To protect Emma, of course, just as I've always tried to protect the people in your life from you." Those words stopped me cold. "What are you talking about?" Vivian sighed, standing up to pour herself a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. "Sarah Williams in college, Christine Baker at your first job, that lovely doctor. What was her name? Melissa. Every time you've gotten close to someone, I've made sure they know exactly who they're dealing with." My mind reeled as I connected the dots. Sarah breaking up with me after meeting my mother at a parents' weekend. Christine mysteriously transferring departments after my mother visited my office. Melissa ending things shortly after I'd introduced her to Vivian at a charity event. "You've been sabotaging my relationships for 20 years, I asked, my voice hollow with disbelief. "I've been protecting innocent women from making the same mistake your father made with me," she replied calmly. "Marrying a man who runs away when things get difficult, who abandons his family when they need him most." "Dad didn't abandon us," I said. "He died of a heart attack." Vivian's eyes hardened. after years of working himself to death to maintain the lifestyle you took for granted. After missing your games and recitals because he was always at the office, he abandoned us long before his heart gave out. And you've punished me for his sins ever since, I said, the realization dawning on me with sickening clarity. You've made sure I could never be happy, never have a family of my own. I've made sure you face the consequences of who you really are, she corrected, just as Emma has now. I stared at my mother, this stranger who had systematically destroyed every chance at happiness I'd ever had. You're sick, I said quietly. You need help. She smiled thinly. I'm the only one who sees you clearly, Jackson, the only one brave enough to tell the truth. As I turned to leave, unable to stand another moment in her presence, Vivian called after me. She's already moved on, you know, Emma. Called off the wedding on Saturday, had dinner with her ex on Tuesday. She sent me a thank you note. Whether it was true or not, the words cut deep. At the door I paused and looked back at the woman who had given me life, and then spent decades trying to ensure it was lived in misery. This isn't over, I said quietly. Vivian smiled, the same smile I remembered from childhood, whenever she thought she'd won. It never is with you, Jackson, that's the problem. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. All those failed relationships, all those women who'd suddenly pulled away. It hadn't been me. It had been her, systematically destroying any chance I had at happiness. But as I pulled into my driveway, a new thought formed. I'd spent 20 years being manipulated by my mother. Now it was time to turn the tables. If she wanted truth, I would give her truth, all of it laid bare for everyone to see, including the parts she'd been hiding all these years, including her greatest secret, the one my father had whispered to me on his deathbed, the one that had started our estrangement 15 years ago. It was time for a family reunion, and this time I would be controlling the narrative. 2 weeks passed in a fog of anger and despair. I barely left my apartment, ignored calls from concerned friends, and lost myself in investigating the extent of my mother's interference in my life. Each discovery was like reopening a wound. Relationships I thought had ended naturally were actually casualties of my mother's manipulation. I was at my kitchen table, surrounded by old photographs and letters, when David let himself in with the spare key I'd given him years ago. Enough, he said, taking in the chaos of my apartment. This has to stop, Jackson. I looked up from a photo of my father and me at my college graduation. You don't understand. I understand that you're letting her win, David said, clearing takeout containers from the coffee table. She's still controlling your life. His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. He was right. Even now, I was letting my mother dictate my actions, my emotions. What would you do? I asked. David sat across from me. I'd get answers, not just from your mother, but from everyone. There are always two sides to every story, man. That afternoon, I drove to my Uncle Robert's house in New Jersey. My father's younger brother had distanced himself from our family after Dad died, another casualty of whatever toxic dynamics my mother had created. Robert's surprise at seeing me on his doorstep quickly gave way to a cautious welcome. Over coffee at his kitchen table, I asked the question that had been haunting me. What really happened between my parents? Robert sighed, rubbing his beard. I wondered when you'd come asking. Your mother, she's not well, Jackson. Never has been. The control, the manipulation, it started long before you were born. He told me how my mother had isolated my father from his family, rewriting history whenever it suited her needs. How she'd convinced my father that his family looked down on her because of her modest background, when in reality, they'd only ever expressed concern about her erratic behavior. Your father loved you more than anything, Robert said, his voice breaking. But Vivian made him choose between being present in your life and challenging her control. He chose to stay, to protect you the only way he knew how. But he wasn't there, I said. He worked constantly. He missed everything. Because she orchestrated it that way, Robert explained. Every time he tried to set boundaries with work, she'd create some new financial emergency. New renovations, luxury vacations, private schools for you. She weaponized your comfort against him. My mind was reeling. Why didn't he leave? He was going to, Robert said quietly. The week before his heart attack, he consulted a divorce attorney. He found evidence that Vivian had been stealing from his company for years, funneling money into secret accounts. I felt like I couldn't breathe. She knew. Robert nodded. They had a massive fight the night before he died. The stress likely triggered his heart attack. He went to his office and returned with a shoebox. These are letters your father wrote to you after major fights with your mother. She intercepted them all. With shaking hands, I opened the first envelope. Jackson, I know I missed your championship game today. Your mother told me it was next weekend. I only found out the truth after calling the coach to confirm the time. By then, it was too late. This isn't the first time this has happened, and I'm starting to see a pattern. I love you, son, and I'm trying to find a way out of this situation that doesn't destroy our family. Please know that my absence isn't because I don't care. Love, Dad. Tears blurred my vision as I read letter after letter, my father's desperate attempts to explain his absences, to maintain a connection with me despite my mother's interference. Letters I'd never seen because my mother had hidden them, letting me believe my father simply didn't care enough to show up. There's more, Robert said. Financial records, emails, evidence of how she manipulated not just your father, but everyone around her. By evening, I had a plan. I would host a family reunion, inviting Emma, my mother, Robert, and other family members who'd been driven away by my mother's machinations. I would bring my father's letters, the evidence Robert had preserved, and confront my mother with the truth she claimed to value so highly. But the final piece came when I searched through my father's old study in the family home while my mother was at her weekly bridge game. Hidden inside a hollowed-out book was a USB drive containing hundreds of audio recordings my father had secretly made during the last year of his life, conversations that revealed the full extent of my mother's manipulations. Most shocking was the final recording, dated the day before his death. My father's voice, tired but determined. Jackson, if you're hearing this, I couldn't protect you from the truth any longer. Your mother has destroyed every relationship I've ever valued. Don't let her do the same to you. The truth about our family isn't what she's led you to believe. As I listened to my father's final message, a strange calm settled over me. For years, I'd carried the weight of his apparent abandonment, the guilt of our unresolved relationship. Now I understood he'd never abandoned me. He'd been fighting for me all along. I sent a text to Emma. I need to talk to you. There's something you should know. Then I began planning a dinner party that would change everything. The next 3 weeks were a blur of careful preparation. I rented a private dining room at Le Jardin, an upscale restaurant where my parents had celebrated their anniversary every year. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. This would be a kind of anniversary too, marking the end of decades of manipulation. I sent out formal invitations, elegant cream-colored cards with gold lettering requesting the honor of your presence for a family reconciliation dinner. My mother accepted immediately, likely viewing this as my surrender, a return to the family fold on her terms. Uncle Robert agreed to come, bringing his wife Susan, who hadn't spoken to my mother in over a decade. I tracked down my father's former business partner, Thomas, who had mysteriously severed ties with our family after Dad's death. He hesitated before accepting, his voice tight with old pain. The most difficult invitation was Emma's. After my text, she'd agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop near her apartment. When I arrived, she was already there, her face pale and guarded. "Thank you for coming," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I almost didn't," she replied, wrapping her hands around her mug. "Your mother called again yesterday." My jaw tightened. "What did she say?" "That you were unstable, that you've been harassing her since the wedding." Emma met my eyes. "Is that true?" "I confronted her once," I said. "About why she called you before our wedding." Emma sighed. "Jackson, I'm sorry about how things ended, but maybe it's for the best. Finding out about your past that way, it made me realize how little I knew about you. That's why I wanted to talk to you," I said, placing a manila envelope on the table. "There's something you should see." Inside was one of my father's letters, written after my DUI arrest. In it, he described how I had immediately taken responsibility, how the incident had fundamentally changed me, how proud he was of how I'd turned my life around afterward. Emma read it slowly, her expression softening. "Your mother said you never showed remorse, that you blamed everyone but yourself. She lied, I said simply, just like she's been lying about me my entire life. I told her everything I'd discovered, the systematic sabotage of my relationships, the isolation of my father, the financial manipulation. As I spoke, tears filled her eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "It doesn't change what happened between us." "Because you deserve the truth," I replied, "and because I'm hosting a dinner next Saturday to confront my mother with everything I've learned. I'd like you to be there." She hesitated. "I don't know, Jackson. This seems like a family matter." "You were going to be my family," I said quietly. "And you were hurt by her lies too. But I understand if it's too much." As I stood to leave, Emma caught my arm. "Wait, is this about getting back together? Because I'm not sure that's possible after everything that's happened." The question stung, but I answered honestly. "This is about truth, nothing more." 3 days before the dinner, I received a text from David. "Emma's seeing someone, just thought you should know." A quick social media search confirmed it. Emma smiling beside a handsome man at a gallery opening. My heart sank, but I pushed the pain aside. This wasn't about winning Emma back. It was about finally breaking free from my mother's web of lies. The morning of the dinner, I visited my father's grave for the first time since his funeral. I placed a single white rose on the headstone and sat on the grass beside it. "I'm sorry I believed her lies about you," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm sorry we lost so much time, but I'm going to set things right tonight, for both of us." As I drove to the restaurant that evening, I called the one person who could truly change everything. The call went to voicemail, as I'd expected. "It's Jackson. I know we haven't spoken in years, but I've recently learned the truth about what happened between you and Mom. If you're willing, there's a dinner tonight at Le Jardin at 7. I think it's time everyone heard your side of the story." I wasn't sure if he would come. My mother had told me he'd moved to Europe after their divorce, but Uncle Robert had given me his real contact information, a cell phone with a local area code. My father's oldest friend, Marcus, who my mother had claimed abandoned our family during our time of greatest need. The final piece fell into place as I parked at the restaurant. A text message. "I'll be there. It's time." Inside, the private dining room was set with elegant place settings, soft lighting casting a warm glow over the space. A small table in the corner held framed photographs, my father and me fishing, family gatherings from happier times, moments my mother had tried to erase. Robert and Susan arrived first, then Thomas. Emma came next, beautiful in a simple blue dress, her eyes widening at the intimate setting. She kept her distance, clearly uncomfortable but determined. My mother was the last to arrive, immaculately dressed as always, her smile faltering slightly when she saw who else was present. "What is this?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "A family reunion," I replied, guiding her to her seat. "I thought it was time we all got reacquainted." As the first course was served, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For 15 years, I'd avoided confrontation with my mother, allowed her version of reality to stand unchallenged. But tonight, every lie would be exposed. And then the dining room door opened one more time. My mother's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor as she stared in disbelief at the final guest. "Hello, Vivian," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." The room fell into stunned silence as everyone stared at the man standing in the doorway. Grey-haired and distinguished in a tailored navy suit, he looked remarkably like an older version of me. "Marcus," my mother whispered, her face drained of all color. "This is impossible." Marcus Thompson had been my father's closest friend since college, his business partner in the firm they built together. After my father's death, my mother had told everyone that Marcus had stolen company funds and fled to Europe, abandoning us in our time of need. She'd even shown me falsified bank statements as proof. But here he was, very much in America, and from the looks on the faces of Uncle Robert and Thomas, they weren't surprised to see him. "Please, join us," I said, gesturing to the empty seat directly across from my mother. Marcus nodded, his eyes briefly meeting mine with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. As he took his seat, my mother's shock transformed into something harder. "What kind of ambush is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempt at control. "This isn't an ambush, Mom," I said calmly. "It's a chance for everyone to finally hear the truth. All of it." I looked around the table at the faces of the people whose lives had been irrevocably altered by my mother's manipulations. Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan, cut off from their only nephew. Thomas, who'd lost a business partner and friend under suspicious circumstances. Emma, whose wedding had been destroyed by lies. And Marcus, whose reputation had been systematically dismantled. "Let's start with Marcus," I said. "Mom told me you stole from the company and abandoned us after Dad died. Is that true?" Marcus shook his head, his eyes never leaving my mother's face. "I never stole a penny, Jackson. After your father's death, I discovered significant financial irregularities. Money was being siphoned from the company into private accounts. When I brought this to Vivian's attention, she accused me of the theft and threatened to go to the police if I didn't leave quietly." "That's absurd," my mother snapped. "He's lying." "Is he?" I asked, pulling a folder from my briefcase. "Because I have the original bank records here, not the altered versions you showed me. They clearly show transfers to your personal accounts, Mom, not Marcus's." I placed the documents on the table. My mother didn't even glance at them. "And then there's this," I continued, removing a stack of sealed envelopes. "Letters Dad wrote to me after missing important events in my life. Letters explaining his absences, letters you intercepted and hid from me." Emma reached for one of the letters, her eyes widening as she read. "These are dated after your father's death," she said softly. "That's right," Uncle Robert confirmed. "Jonathan wrote them in advance for milestone events he was afraid he might miss. Jackson's college graduation, his 30th birthday, his wedding day. He gave them to me for safekeeping, but when I tried to deliver them, Vivian claimed Jackson wanted nothing to do with his father's memory." My mother's hands clenched into fists. "This is ridiculous. You're all ganging up on me, twisting the past to vilify me." "No one is twisting anything," I said, my voice steady. "For the first time, we're simply acknowledging the truth." I turned to Emma. "My mother didn't call you before our wedding because she was concerned about my past. She called you because she systematically destroyed every meaningful relationship I've ever had. She did the same thing to my father, isolating him from everyone who cared about him." "That's not true," my mother insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "It is true," Marcus said quietly. "Jonathan confided in me about your manipulation, Vivian. How you'd create financial crises to force him to work more, then blame him for being absent. How you'd arrange for him to miss important events in Jackson's life, then paint him as a neglectful father." Thomas nodded. "I witnessed it too. The night before Jonathan died, he told me he was finally going to leave you. He had evidence of your embezzlement, and he was going to use it to make sure you couldn't turn Jackson against him during the divorce." My mother's face contorted with fury. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Jonathan would never have left me." "He already had," I said, removing one final item from my briefcase, my father's old voice recorder. "He was just waiting for the right moment to tell you." I pressed play and my father's voice filled the room. "I'm filing for divorce, Vivian. I've documented your theft from the company, your manipulation of Jackson, everything. I won't let you destroy him the way you've tried to destroy me." My mother's voice followed, cold and clear. "If you leave me, I'll make sure Jackson never speaks to you again. I'll tell him things about you that will make him hate you forever." My father again. "It's over, Vivian. I'm picking Jackson up from college tomorrow, and I'm telling him everything." But he never made it to my college. He died of a heart attack that night. The recording ended, leaving behind a devastating silence. Emma was openly crying now. Uncle Robert had his arm around a weeping Aunt Susan. Thomas and Marcus stared at my mother with undisguised contempt. My mother sat perfectly still, her face a mask of rage and something else, fear. "Is this what you wanted?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. "To humiliate me in front of everyone?" "No," I said honestly. "What I wanted was for you to acknowledge what you've done, to take responsibility for once in your life." She laughed, a brittle sound. "You're just like your father, weak, sentimental." "Your manipulation stops here," I said, standing up. "Everyone in this room now knows the truth about you. You have no power over any of us anymore." My mother's eyes darted around the table, searching for an ally and finding none. For the first time in my life, I saw her for what she truly was. Not an all-powerful matriarch, but a deeply damaged, frightened woman who had built her entire identity on controlling others. As she rose to leave, Emma's voice stopped her. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why destroy your son's happiness?" My mother turned, her expression suddenly vulnerable. "Because he was going to leave me," she whispered, "just like his father was going to. Everyone always leaves." And with those words hanging in the air, she walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of the lies she'd spent a lifetime constructing. The weeks following the confrontation dinner passed in a blur of emotional revelations and painful healing. My mother retreated to her sister's home in Connecticut, refusing all contact. I hadn't expected her to suddenly acknowledge her actions or seek forgiveness. Decades of manipulation don't dissolve overnight, but her silence still stung in ways I hadn't anticipated. What surprised me most were the relationships that began to rebuild themselves in the absence of her influence. Uncle Robert invited me to Sunday dinners with his family, filling me in on years of missed connections. Marcus shared stories about my father that painted a completely different picture than the absent workaholic my mother had described. Even Thomas, who had been wary of me for years, reached out to offer me a position in the company he and my father had built together, but Emma remained distant. We'd spoken briefly after the dinner, her eyes filled with a complicated mixture of emotions. "I'm sorry for what your mother did to you," she'd said, "but I need time to process everything." I'd respected her wishes, despite the ache in my chest every time I thought of her. The truth had cost me the woman I loved, but living with lies would have cost me so much more. 3 months after the confrontation, I was at Uncle Robert's house for our now regular Sunday dinner, when my phone buzzed with a text message. "Can we talk? Emma." We met at a small park where we'd often walked during our relationship. The autumn air was crisp, trees beginning to turn gold and crimson. Emma was already there, seated on our favorite bench. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, as I sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Of course," I replied, my heart racing despite my efforts to stay calm. She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About your mother, about us, about truth and lies." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I was so angry at first," she admitted. "Angry that you hadn't told me about your past. Angry that I was manipulated. Angry at myself for walking away instead of talking to you." "You had every right to be angry," I said quietly. "Maybe," she agreed. "But I've realized something important. Your mother spent your entire life teaching you that honesty was punished, that sharing vulnerable parts of yourself led to abandonment. And then I proved her right by leaving you at the altar when I learned about a mistake you'd made nearly 2 decades ago." Her words hit me with unexpected force. I'd been so focused on my mother's manipulation that I hadn't fully processed how deeply her lessons had been ingrained in me, the fear of rejection that had made me hide parts of myself, even from the woman I loved. "I should have told you about the DUI," I acknowledged. "I was afraid of losing you, and I should have given you a chance to explain instead of letting your mother's version be the only one I heard." Emma's eyes met mine. "We both made mistakes, Jackson." A flutter of hope rose in my chest, but I tamped it down. "I heard you're seeing someone." She shook her head. "That ended weeks ago. He was—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Safe. Uncomplicated. But there was no depth there, no real connection." We sat in silence for a moment, watching a pair of squirrels chase each other up a nearby oak tree. "I've started therapy," I said finally, trying to understand how my mother's manipulation shaped me, how to break those patterns. Emma smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "That's really good, Jackson. I'm proud of you." "What about you?" I asked. "How are you doing with everything?" "I'm doing better," she said. "I needed time to separate my feelings about what your mother did from my feelings about you." She hesitated, then added, "I miss you." 3 simple words, yet they carried the weight of possibility. "I miss you too," I admitted. "But I understand if too much has happened between us." Emma turned to face me fully. I don't want to rush back into anything. We both need time to heal, to rebuild trust. But I'd like to try again, if you would. Slowly. 2 weeks later, my mother finally contacted me, not with an apology, but with a request to meet. We sat across from each other at a small cafe, the tension between us almost tangible. "I've been seeing someone," she said without preamble. "A therapist." Of all the things I'd expected her to say, this wasn't one of them. "It's not because I think I'm wrong," she continued, a flash of her old defensiveness emerging. "But your father always said I needed help, and now—" She trailed off, looking somehow smaller than I remembered. "Now?" I prompted gently. "Now I have nothing left to lose," she finished. "Everyone knows the worst of me already." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was something I never thought I'd see. A crack in the perfect facade, a glimpse of vulnerability. "I can't promise we'll ever have a normal relationship," I told her honestly. "Too much has happened." She nodded, her eyes revealing a pain I'd never allowed myself to see before. "I know. But maybe we can have something. Eventually." 6 months later, Emma and I stood together at my father's grave. We weren't engaged again, not yet. But we were building something new, something based on honesty and hard-won wisdom. She placed a bouquet of white roses beside the headstone. "I wish I could have met him," she said softly. "Me too," I replied, taking her hand in mine. "But in a way I feel like I finally have, through his letters, his recordings, the stories from people who truly knew him." My mother and I still had a complicated relationship, filled with cautious boundaries and the slow, painful work of truth-telling. She was trying in her way, though decades of patterns couldn't be undone in months. Some days I doubted we'd ever find real healing, but other days brought small moments of connection that had never been possible before. Uncle Robert had become a steady presence in my life, filling in the paternal role my father hadn't lived to fulfill. Marcus and I met regularly for coffee, his stories about my father a precious gift. As Emma and I walked back to the car, the crisp autumn air filled with the scent of fallen leaves, I felt a sense of peace I'd never known before. The truth had cost me greatly. My wedding day, my illusions about my family, the comfortable denial I'd lived in for years. But the truth had also set me free. Free to build authentic relationships, free to love without fear, free to become the man my father had always believed I could be. "Are you okay?" Emma asked, squeezing my hand. I looked at her, this remarkable woman who had walked away when faced with lies, but found the courage to return when faced with truth, and smiled. "Yes," I said, "I really am." And for the first time in 40 years, it wasn't just something I was saying, it was the truth.